Hi, everybody. Hello, hello. I'm going to wait a couple minutes for people to start jumping on. Let me make sure this is recording because I can hear Michelle in my head saying, let's make sure this is recording. Hi, Jamie. Hello, hello. All right, we're going to give it like a minute or so, and then I'm going to get started. I'm really excited. Michelle felt really bad that she wasn't able to do the Zoom tonight. She's not feeling well, but I figured what a good opportunity to come on here and introduce myself again a little bit more and talk about something that I feel is quite common in a lot of the calls that I've had since I've started coaching with you all. So I think this is going to be a good opportunity to talk about this. So a couple more minutes. People are starting to hop on. Let me make sure the chat is going. Awesome. Okay, so today's topic might feel a little bit heavy at first. I want you guys to bear with me as we go through it. I think a lot of the healing and the balancing, I love the word balance. I think it's such a profound word, but the balancing that we do with our health is done at a more steady and productive pace when we acknowledge our feelings and allow ourselves to feel them. So I want to dive into this today because, like I said, it's been a common topic that's been coming up in a lot of calls. So let's dive right in. So one of the things from my own experience when I started in CCA, oh, am I echoing? Oh, geez. Thanks for letting me know. Hold on, let me see what's going on here. I'm going to mute myself and then unmute myself and hope that. Okay. Maybe I'm talking too loud. That's the Cuban in me coming out. Sorry. Let me know if that sounds a little bit better. Hopefully, yeah, a little bit. Is anybody else hearing me echo? Let me see this chat box. Yeah, let me know if I'm echoing to you guys. I don't want to be. Let me see here. All right, I'm not seeing anybody else say, so I'm going to keep rolling. If it gets really bad, let me know. So one thing that I really wanted to touch base on, again, part of the healing and the work that we have to do in balancing our health is really figuring out how to acknowledge our feelings without being consumed by them. So I wanted to talk about the stages of grief because I think they really relate. And we often think of the stages of grief as something that is associated with death, but it can be to anything. It can be to any kind of loss that you've experienced. And for us that have been diagnosed later on in life, maybe at a point where we know what it was like before we had our diagnosis, we often feel that we're grieving who we were, that we're grieving what we used to be able to experience, even though for the most part, many of us might have already still been sick. I, for the most part, knew I was I still haven't been diagnosed with PCOS officially. I know I definitely have ulcerative colitis. So I have the diagnosis and I was pretty sure I had it early on. But once you hear it and see it on paper and see the labs, it hits you differently. And you do kind of go through this sense of grief over the person you were before that diagnosis. So remembering how it was versus how it is now is something that is an internal conflict we go through a lot. And maybe those of you who are in KGG might even have this a little bit more, that you might relate to this, where, you know, I remember when I started CCA and I was working with Michelle, I was like the perfect quote unquote student. I mean, I've always been a perfectionist. I'm working on that, right? But I've listened to all the Zooms and I did every baby step that Michelle recommended. And I mean, I did everything to a T. And then it got to the point where it started to hit me that, like, wait a minute, this isn't like a program that there's a deadline, right? Like for us, I've been through the diet culture of, you know, oh, 10-week challenge, lose this much weight, or do this for 3 months, and, you know, which we know isn't healthy. But it was so embedded in my mind that after a while, I started to realize, like, oh my God, like this is how I have to live my life the rest of my life. And that sat really heavy with me for a while. And I kept pushing those feelings down. And then eventually I had to just acknowledge them, because what you resist persists, what persists expands. So, and part of healing and growing is to acknowledge the grief that comes with your diagnosis. So it reminds me of this book. I have this favorite author called Mitch Albom. He wrote a book called Tuesdays with Morrie. If anybody's listened or read that book, it's an amazing book. And there's a part in the book that talks about the characters in a mental hospital. And there's this patient that lies across the floor every day, the same way, all day long. And people just kind of like walk over this person. And the character was like, well, why is this person there? And they're like, oh, that's just what they do. They just lie there all the time. No big deal. Well, this character finally decided to acknowledge this person. And all the character did was to lie down next to the person and just sit silently. And the next day, the person wasn't there. And I thought about that so much, as we have to acknowledge our feelings and all that comes with it, so that way we can move past it. And it doesn't mean we get over it, because healing comes in waves, grieving comes in waves. But the faster we allow ourselves to acknowledge what we're feeling, the better off we are. And the more willing we are to accept support and help, which is like I just got off a call with a client now, and we were talking about taking that lifesaver when we're offering it. You know, if you're drowning, take the lifesaver. Why struggle trying to stay above the water, right? Just take the lifesaver. But in order to take that lifesaver, you have to acknowledge that you need it. And that's a hard reality to face, because in order to accept that you need help, you have to accept that there's a diagnosis that you have that makes you, or that warrants that kind of support and help, and understand that you can't do it alone. So I think often about that scene in that book of that person just lying there and acknowledging that. So yeah, like Becky's like grieving the old version of yourself, especially those of us who were diagnosed later on in life. I wasn't diagnosed until I was 25. I dealt with most of it, but not to the extent where now I needed a diagnosis, right? So you often think about that old you, the you that could eat whatever you want and, you know, exercise and you'd lose weight easily, or your hair. Like, my God, I remember having pictures of my hair. Like, I had hair that I don't have to, like, you know, part it in certain ways, and, you know, the bald spots that showed, and it comes in the stages of grief. That's a lot that shows in it. So let's dive into that here. And while I'm talking about this, I want you guys to get in the comment section, share, and bear with me. I know it might feel heavy and very negative to a point, but there's for a reason. There's some reason for my madness. Share maybe what you feel your diagnosis has taken from you, or what you've lost from your diagnosis. Put that in the comment section, and let's reflect on that a little bit. Again, acknowledging those feelings. What has your diagnosis, what has your illness, PCOS, Hashimoto's, I have colitis, you know, hypothyroidism, what has it kind of taken away from you? What do you feel like you've lost in having that diagnosis? So the stages of grief, the stages of grief, it's not linear, by the way. So this comes in waves. The first one being denial. So how many of us have kept living our lives as if we weren't diagnosed, right? I remember when I was first diagnosed with colitis, it was crazy, because I come out of the colonoscopy, I'm high off my ass because of all the drugs they pump into you to do this colonoscopy. And the doctor's like, hey, Evie, yeah, you got ulcerative colitis. I need you to take these drugs, this medicine, and I'll see you in 6 weeks. And he left. He went on for his next colonoscopy. Here I am, just had a kid. I am feeling like crap. And this doctor was just like, threw this term to me, ulcerative colitis. I had no idea what it was. So I Googled it getting home, and of course read all the stuff that came with, you know, oh, the colostomy bag, and you're going to lose your intestines and lose, you know, I mean, what kind of doctor does that, first of all, right? So I see your Chelsea, lost my trust in men doctors. Yeah, you lose your trust in the medical field, because they're supposed to be of service to you. And at no point did I feel like anybody was serving me. And it's not to negate medicine. We need medicine, right? Like, if my arm fell off tomorrow, I need to go to a hospital. I need a doctor. But medicine often negates the lifestyle and the stresses that contribute to our illnesses. And I don't feel that they're acknowledged often. And they're kind of just like, they see us for 5 minutes, they give us that diagnosis, they let go, and they don't have to deal with the repercussions like we do. So in that denial process, like, you know, how often have you found yourself denying that you have this diagnosis, whether it's the way you live your life, right? The way I remember when I was diagnosed, I would still like go to the gym twice a day if I could, 5 days a week. I got to get this weight off. I got to get this weight off, acting as if I didn't just get diagnosed with an autoimmune illness, right? That's denial. That's the stages of grief. That's denial in the fact that, no, I don't have to stop living the way I want to live. I was diagnosed with colitis, and I remember still coming home and binging and like eating everything in sight, M&Ms, cookies, bread. I mean, whatever you can think of, that's what I would go for, right? In denial of the fact that it was going to affect me at some point. So looking over my notes here. So, and how many of us have refused the help? So some of you in CCA and KGG, you have us, and you still might be finding yourself in those waves of refusing the help, of refusing the support given to you. Maybe because you also don't trust the support, right? Because we were raised to trust doctors, and we were raised to trust the medical field, and we have been shown disappointment for many of us. So here's a program, me and Michelle telling you, hey, you can trust us, we're here to support you. We understand that we have to build that rapport with you in that relationship for you to trust us, because you've been burned by people saying, oh, you can trust us, take this medicine, it'll get you better. No, it didn't do crap diddly do for me. Okay, so that's denial in itself. Let me look back at these comments here before I lose track of it. I feel like I've lost some independence because I have a hard time asking for help. Yeah, that's denial, right? So the child development person in me, a lot of what I tried to do with the kids in my classroom was identifying their emotions. And isn't it interesting that even as adults, we still have to identify our emotions? Because when we can identify them, then we can get to working through them, right? So feeling like you've lost independence because you have a hard time asking for help. Part of that is ingrained in you because that's maybe how we were raised, that how dare we ask for help? We should be able to do things all by ourselves. But it's also the denial, because if you need help, that means you have to accept that you have a diagnosis that warrants that help. That comes with the denial piece. PCOS and ulcerative colitis initially took my freedom to just go with the flow. I have to plan everything. Yes. Oh my God. I cannot remember a time where I was able to be spontaneous, because I didn't know. Like, I could feel good this morning and tonight I'm in the toilet for like a good hour, right? Or like, you know, all of a sudden I'm feeling great, my face looks clear, and then the next day I've got like blotches everywhere. Like, what the hell happened, right? Yeah, absolutely. The fatigue from both also made me feel so dependent on my husband. I'm a very independent person. Yeah, absolutely. I totally relate to that. So anger, right? And anger comes with like self-pity and bitterness, frustration, right? And when you go through anger with that diagnosis, what happens? You're releasing more stress hormones. So now we know what that does to us. But initially, when you got that diagnosis, you might have not realized that cortisol and adrenaline, what it does to our bodies and how it literally causes fatigue and weight gain and a spiral effect of everything that goes on when those hormones are released. So you go through these stages of anger, and you might be angry with yourself. I remember getting angry with my spouse for like no apparent reason. I would see him eating something that I really wanted, I'd just be pissed off. Did anybody relate to that? Like, or I would go to the beach and see all these girls like eating hot dogs and hamburgers and in bikinis. I'm like, what the heck? Like, I can't do that, right? So you go through the stage of anger, and what it does is it makes you resentful. And again, it doesn't help you accept the help, because you're angry at the fact that you have to deal with this. You don't want to accept the help. Bargaining. All right, so this can often look like, I will try every diet under the sun if it says it can heal me. I remember doing the cabbage soup diet. I tried like strictly keto for a while. I did paleo. My God, the amount of money I spent on that one. I did Atkins. I mean, any diet that's marketed to us, I tried it all. And part of that is the bargaining. Part of it's like, okay, if you tell me I do this and I can heal, okay, I'll do whatever you tell me to do, just so I can have my health back, just so I can have my life back, just so I can plan something without feeling like it's going to be unpredictable and I can't depend on anything, right? That comes with the bargaining. Bargaining also means asking what if. This is when you get stuck in your thoughts. Well, what if maybe I ate better as a kid? Maybe I wouldn't have this diagnosis. Or maybe if I didn't go through this experience as a kid or as an adult, I wouldn't have this, right? So you just get fixated on the past. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't serve us anything, but that's part of the bargaining. That's a stage of grief. You're literally grieving. So you're trying to make sense of what's happening. And you think things would be different if it was a what if, right? Yeah, Christy, very resentful. Absolutely, absolutely. Depression, another stage of grief. So, and we often think depression means sadness, but it also can mean disconnected. Like you don't feel attuned to yourself. How many of you can relate to this? Like, let me hear it from the comment section. Like, how many of you feel that you go through these days where you're not in your body? Like you just feel out of it. You don't feel like you're connected to anything you're feeling. It's almost like you're numb, right? Like that is the depression. That's the stage that you have to kind of go through to get to the next part. Yes, right? The depression, the disconnect, the lack of attunement to your own needs, right? So in this stage, we often find ourselves going through the day and you kind of stop yourself and like, what did I do today? Like what happened? Like, I don't even remember going through this day. Yeah, sometimes, sometimes I look in the mirror and say, who are you? Yeah, that's powerful, right? Like, and I'm going to get into that because that's our goal, is to now start identifying who we are with this diagnosis. So that's, yeah. That's absolutely like autopilot, right? Like autopilot, you're going through depression. So you might find yourself saying, I don't feel like myself. Like I don't even know who I am anymore, right? Like, who are you? Who am I? This disconnect. I just can't seem to do what I'm supposed to do. How many times have I heard on calls where I say to myself, I know what I'm supposed to be doing. Why can't I just do it? Why can't I just eat the way I'm supposed to eat? Why can't I just drink enough water? Why can't I just like manage my stress better? You know, and it's human nature, but it's all part of the grieving process. Longing for what was, having a sense of hopelessness. All right, I know this might be feeling really heavy, guys, but bear with me because we got to acknowledge those feelings in order to accept the help. Remember that image of that person lying across the floor. That person had been lying there. I remember in the book, I don't remember the exact time, but every day that person's just there and people are just walking over that person. How often do we just walk over our own feelings? We push them way down. We minimize what we're feeling. Well, I mean, it's not that bad. The stress wasn't that bad. Like, I don't think I feel that bad. We minimize what we're feeling because we think that's the right way to do it. But we want to now be that person that lies next to the person lying across the floor and acknowledge them so that tomorrow we can move past it. Okay. Last stage of grief is acceptance. So all of these stages come in waves. And that's the hard part, is accepting that it comes in waves. Because there's going to be a day where you've come to accept everything that's happened and what you have to deal with. And then there's going to be days where you're angry again at the diagnosis because maybe you went out with a few friends and you realize like, okay, maybe they're able to have this food and I can't, right? And we're working, like you guys have been doing this, some of you for so long, maybe longer than when I joined in 2019. So you know all the strategies and the food swaps. But at the end of the day, we still have to deal with it and we have to do it. And there's other people that don't, you know, so we have to accept that. One day you're accepting, the other you're not. But you will never accept and grow into who you can be if you never grieve over who you were. So that's really the point of this, is like allowing ourselves to grieve that. I remember when I started in CCA, a lot of my calls with Michelle were about mindset. And it was interesting, maybe some of you could relate to this, that I found the calls were less about food. And I remember having one call with Michelle and saying like, okay, I was expecting you to tell me like what I need to eat, what I need to cut out, what I need to restrict, what I need to limit. Why are you asking me about my childhood? Why are you telling me I should be eating over 1,200 calories? I'm used to eating like 800. It's less. And it was interesting because the more we talked, the more she started to realize that I needed to come to accept my diagnosis, but understand that it doesn't mean my life's going to be shitty all the time. Like, I'm not going to be depressed the rest of my life, that you can live an exciting life, even with PCOS, even with Hashimoto's, even with hypothyroidism or colitis or whatever our diagnosis is, that we can still live a meaningful, fulfilling, exciting life. We can feel good in our bodies. We can feel good in our clothes, even with that diagnosis. And I remember her telling me that. And at first I wasn't ready to hear it. But over time, it started to click as I started to learn strategies and techniques and understanding that it doesn't happen overnight. And for those of us like myself who are perfectionists, that have a real case of FOMO, or like that we need everything right now, that is a hard pill to swallow. That it takes time. It takes so much reflecting that can also be really exhausting. But in that grunt, in that work, is where the balance happens. So in that acceptance comes a rebirth. And I shared something I wrote the other day on the Facebook group. I wrote it probably when I started in CCA, about my experience one night. I was in a flare. When you're flaring with colitis, I mean, there's, I don't know how many times I didn't make it to the bathroom. I mean, it's so unpredictable. And I remember I was putting my daughter to sleep. I thought she was asleep. I run off to the bathroom. I'm like, oh my God, I gotta get there. And she comes waddling in and lies down on the floor next to me. And I'm like, what are you doing? She's like, Mommy, I just want to be next to you. And that night I wrote that piece of like, here's this little girl who did not know me before colitis, and she still wants to be with me. She still wants to love me. She still sees me as someone that's special. And it's time that I start seeing myself that way. Right? How many of you relate to that? Like, you have people in your life right now that love you and support you and would never say the things you say to yourself. And it's time that you start showing the same love to yourself. You start showing the same support to yourself. You start giving yourself the same grace you would give to others who you love. And in that comes like a rebirth, a new beginning. So now I want you guys in the comments section, I want to hear from you. What has this diagnosis given you? Positives. And I'm going to ask you to dig real deep, because maybe this might be a challenge for you. But I want you to really think about, what have I gained in a positive way from my diagnosis, from this journey of being diagnosed with PCOS, Hashimoto's? Let me hear from you. Back on the comments here. You might need to do some digging, and maybe this is something that, you know, when we come off this call tonight, you really look back on and change your perspective. Because remember, and for those of you who are in KGG, you've probably heard this long enough, what you focus on expands. So, you know, for those of you who might have heard the terms law of attraction, you know, we know that the universe always gives to us what we give it out. What we focus on is what shifts. So really focus on, if I wasn't diagnosed with this, what would be different? Or what has this given me that maybe I wouldn't have noticed, I wouldn't have appreciated had I not had this diagnosis? All right, let's see here. It's made me so much more empathetic and less judgmental of people that society judges. I think I'm a much more empathetic, kinder person to others because of knowing what I invisibly struggle with and knowing that other people struggle too. Yes. Yes, I'm able to give grace more because I know everyone has a struggle. Yeah, love it, right? So changing your perspective. I've gained a huge support system from family, friends, and you all. I also gained a lot less stressful lifestyle. I had to change my whole life, my job, how I deal with anger, depression. Yes, love it. Stronger than I thought I was, and I won't die through anxiety and panic attacks, right? Like, if we can get through this, we could pretty much do anything, people. Like, you know, like, if we can live in our bodies that are literally trying to attack us on a daily basis, I'm pretty sure we can deal with just about anything. Jenna says, I have gained the knowledge of what eating good looks like and makes me feel like, helps me realize it's okay to ask for help, helps me realize it's okay to not be okay, help me with law of attraction. I've definitely learned more confident. I love it, love it. How many of us didn't realize how important food was until we were forced to look at food? Right? Like I grew up in a Spanish household. My parents are Cuban. We ate fried everything. I mean, for breakfast, literally it was eggs, fried steak from the night before, and Cuban bread every morning. And then my grandmother, to top it all off, I'd come down to the summers in Florida with her and she'd be like, oh, you're so skinny, you need to eat more. She fed me that way for like 3 months, and then, oh, you're getting too big now. Like, so yeah, now looking back, hindsight, now I see why that was not healthy. But had I not done this, gone through this journey of self-reflection and balance, I wouldn't have realized it. And I probably would have dealt with my body dysmorphia for the rest of my life and just thought this is the norm. Yes, I was a skinny bitch that thought people who were heavier were lazy. Now I have so much empathy and love for all people. Hate being sick, but all my friends say I'm so much nicer and a bit funnier. See, it's like perspective. Things go, there's this guy on TikTok. I don't know if anybody likes TikTok. I wish I could remember this guy's name. He's a psychoanalyst. And he was talking about when he got COVID. And he's a perfectionist. He's an overproducer. And he said he was sick as a dog. Like he could not get out of bed. He was puking everywhere. But for him, productivity meant worth. That if he wasn't producing, if he wasn't contributing to something, he was worthless. So for those of you who have that conflict with yourself about resting, well, I shouldn't have to rest. Like I should be able to just keep chugging along. That's the denial. You're denying the fact that you need rest. Our bodies are not machines, especially our bodies that are dealing with hormonal imbalances. So he was talking about getting diagnosed with COVID, and he went through this exercise when he was learning to do the psychoanalyst stuff. I don't understand it, but where you personify the part of you that you're struggling with, right? So I've used this with some of the clients these last few weeks, where you take something you're struggling with and make it into a person and talk to it. And the first thing you want to ask them is, what do you want me to know about you? So he asks this nausea, this sickness, this overwhelming heaviness. He's like, what do you want me to know about you? And his brain talked back and said, I don't believe you would rest unless you were this sick. I don't trust that you would rest unless you were this sick. And he was just like, oh my God, no way. And of course, he went into denial. The next day, he tried to go to the office to pick up some stuff to make some TikTok videos, and he threw up all over his porch. And he finally gave in and was like, fine, I'll rest. And he like slept for 2 days. But at the end of it, he realized like our bodies are going to demand our attention one way or another. Why wait for our bodies to demand it in the negative way, where our diagnosis gets worse? I remember going to the doctor, and I was right before I had been messaging back and forth with Michelle, but I wasn't taking the life vest. She was throwing it, but I wasn't taking the life vest. I was still in denial of my diagnosis. And I went to the doctor, and the doctor's like, listen, if we don't get you under control, we're going to have to remove your intestine. And for a 25-year-old to hear that, I was like, what are you talking about? Like, no way. And he's like, you're more at risk for cancer, that. And that's when it finally clicked. Like, I don't want to wait until it's so bad for me to accept my diagnosis and to accept help. It's here now. I'm going to take it. But in order for me to take it, I had to grieve. And I've been with CCA since 2019, and now I'm a coach, and I'm still going through it. Some of you have heard me in your calls say like, hey, I relate. I'm still figuring it out. But that's the whole part of balance. It's a journey. There's no destination. And we have to rewire our brains, because our brains have been programmed into like the diet culture that you do something for a certain amount of time and you'll see this result, right? So I remember doing CCA and I'm like, okay, results, right? And there were, but they weren't the results that society programmed me to think there should be. But now I have a healthier balance of life. Like you said, I've left toxic environments because of this. Had I not been diagnosed, I would not have slowed down. I've always lived my life on the go, 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 go. And even with the diagnosis, I would have run myself to the ground before I hit 40 because of the amount of stress I was doing to my body. So it's almost like for myself, for my reflection, it's like I had to get this diagnosis to slow down, to be mindful of what I'm doing to myself. And that's hard because it's hard to kind of see the positive in things. And that's why I asked you guys to reflect on what has this given you? What have you gained positively from this diagnosis? And some of you might not be ready to really think about that yet, and that's okay. But have that be in the back of your mind, because again, when you shift your perspective, when you shift how you see things, things start to change. When you start changing, things start to change. And that's really the challenge. All right. So let me hear your thoughts there. I know this was a heavy topic. I'm going to keep it brief because it was a lot of, reflecting and diving into your own thoughts. But let me hear what you think before we hop off. And I'm going to challenge you guys tonight to maybe do some journaling and think about what positive have you gotten from this diagnosis. Change that perspective a little bit. Let me hear from you guys. I got my water. You can hear Michelle saying, sit and sip, sit and sip. I don't know if any of you hear her I hear her in my head all the time now. Let's see here, let's look at the comment section. Here we go. Yeah, I definitely have been struggling with the stages of grief. The last one, acceptance, is very hard for me still. And it will be. And it comes in waves. There are days where I accept I accept that I have colitis. I know what I need to do. I eat the right foods. I do the right strategies. And then there are days that I wake up and I'm just like, I got to do it all over again. Right? I got to do it all over again. And maybe those of you who are in KGG can really relate to this, that have been doing the program longer. I remember I went MIA for a while because Michelle kept throwing me the lifesaver. And again, the stages of grief, I just kept denying that I needed it. I just kept saying, no, I can do this on my own. I can eat the fried food. I'm not going to crap blood anymore. I promise. I'm fine. Bargaining, right? I'd rather do this diet. It says in 6 weeks, I'll be fine. I went through all of it, and I still go through those waves. I didn't realize I had to go through the steps. Acceptance is very hard. I'm dealing with anger and depression. Yeah. And acknowledge it, right? Acknowledge that. I'm not telling you to sit with it and let it just eat away at you. But it's almost like you have to face that monster in your head to start to fight, or not, I don't want to use the word fight, but to start to shift how you work with it, right? So I have clinical depression. I've always had clinical depression. And one of the things that I started doing, that I recommend a lot of clients start doing with anything, whether it's an eating disorder, whether it's a certain mindset that you have, is start personifying that separately. The depression became so ingrained of who I was that I had a hard time knowing who was talking. My husband. He's like showing me a phone with a message on it. I'm like, okay. But yeah, I had to start separating the depression from me, right? And part of that is the grief, is accepting that I will live alongside you, but you will not determine the quality of my life. You may impact it, because now I have to change the way I do things. I have to change the way I eat. I have to change the way I think about health and stress and mindset. But you will not change how I get to enjoy my life or the quality of it. Does that make sense? I hope it makes sense. It's late. Grieving is hard, but it's like a deep connection with your body when the light bulb goes off. Yeah. It's hard to do it because it's not how I was raised. Yeah. Right? For those of us who were raised to, why are you crying? You don't have anything to cry for. I grew up in a household, my parents were great. My grandparents, who pretty much raised me, almost ridiculed me if I cried or showed any emotion. It was a sign of weakness. But grieving is sadness. You have to grieve. You find yourself vulnerable through it. So if you've never been taught or been allowed to have feelings, then you find this inner conflict with yourself. Again, personify that. take that inner voice that's saying, no, you can't feel this, and talk to that person, talk to that voice and say, well, what do you want me to know about you? Why can't I feel this? I talk to myself all day long. My husband's so used to it by now. He walks in and I'm talking to myself because I'm having these conversations inside my head, right? And it's weird and it's uncomfortable, but I wouldn't be where I'm at. You all wouldn't be where you're at if you didn't allow yourself to do the uncomfortable. Right? Awesome. So much good feedback. I hope that this resonated with you guys because I've heard it a lot in calls. I just spoke to a client like a week ago in KGG, and I remember her saying, I just feel like I failed, like I've wasted my time. And in conversation, I started to hear these things that made me think, I don't think you grieved your diagnosis. And it was like a breakthrough moment for her. Like, oh, yeah, I don't think I have. So allow yourself and acknowledge that person lying on the floor that is just asking you to acknowledge it. And then maybe tomorrow won't be there anymore because you've acknowledged it. It's there. All right. Thank you all so much. Michelle will be on Sunday, normal time, 8 o'clock. I look forward to continuing to work with all of you. I see some names on here that I haven't had calls with yet, so I'm looking forward to having a call with you. Some names I've already had chances to speak with. So again, text us. It's not a burden. We want to hear from you. I was there. Now I'm a coach, so I get to be on the other side, and I remember what it was like. So trust me, it's worth it. Just send that text, book that session. We're here to support you. All right. Have a good night, everybody. Enjoy. Bye.